In the past 20 years, Ocarina of Time has been widely popular in speedrunning, not only because the game is incredible, but also because it's incredibly broken. Today we're going to look at an extremely potent yet misunderstood glitch that allows speedrunners to beat the game in under 17 minutes. One that can let you directly access the game's credits from the Fire Temple. A glitch that creates time paradoxes. This is Ocarina of Time's Wrong Warp Explained. Disclaimer: this video was written and recorded before the discovery of arbitrary code execution that revolutionized Ocarina of Time in recent months. Everything in this video is still true, but wrong warping is no longer involved in the fastest any percent route. Before we begin, I need to thank MZXRules for making this video possible. His extensive knowledge of the inner workings of Ocarina of Time was incredibly helpful for my research, and he was kind enough to answer dozens upon dozens of questions as I wrote the script for this video. I can't understate just how clueless I would have been without him. So first, let's see what a wrong warp is. Here's a comparison of a normal warp and a wrong warp. In a normal warp, Link is sent to the intended place and the cutscene plays out. With a wrong warp, the warping sequence is interrupted and Link is sent to another place, usually completely unrelated to the intended destination. While wrong warping is used a lot in the all dungeons and 100% categories, it's mostly known for its use in any percent, in which Link goes from the Deku Tree directly to Ganon's collapsing tower, skipping nearly the entire game. It seems like the wrong warp could be used to go anywhere from any dungeon exit, but that's not actually the case. It turns out this is a very complicated glitch with lots of restrictions. To fully understand how wrong warps work, we first need to understand how warping in general works. When Link takes a warp or enters any other loading zone, the game needs to go through a process to transition from one scene to another. As an example, let's use the warp at the end of the Deku Tree. First, as Link steps in the blue warp, the game strips control away from the player. Then, Link walks to the center of the warp and this sequence plays out. Meanwhile, a timer, conveniently called the blue warp timer, is counting up on every frame. When this timer hits 101, two variables used in the scene transition are set. The next cutscene number is set to 1 and the next entrance index is set to 238. Then the screen fades out and the game starts the scene transition. The next entrance index is used to set not only which map Link will be in, but also where he'll be entering from. A scene can have more than one entrance. Kokiri Forest has 13 of them. These include 6 houses and shops, both Lost Woods entrances, the Deku Tree, 3 special entrances that follow cutscenes, and an unused one where Link is spawned on top of his house. All of these entrances are assigned a unique value and ordered in a long list called the entrance table. The next entrance index of 238 corresponds to a special entrance of Kokiri Forest that's reserved for cutscenes only, and is labeled as Kokiri Forest's first entrance or entrance 0. Cutscenes are always associated with the first entrance of any given scene, so that's why this one is used. The first step is to make sure the correct cutscene plays after the scene transition. For this, the game looks at the next cutscene number. Kokiri Forest has a few different cutscenes, and the post-dungeon cutscene is number 1. First, a check is made to see if the next cutscene number equals -1, which is the default value that means no cutscene needs to play. Since it's not equal to -1, a cutscene does play. So the next cutscene number is copied to the current cutscene number, then it is reset back to -1. Finally, because this cutscene always plays during the day, the time is manually set to noon. Next, the game checks for these 5 specific special cases: when Link learns a Requiem of Spirit, when he learns the Nocturne of Shadow, when he gets the Fairy Ocarina from Saria, when he gets the Light Arrows, and when Ganon's tower collapses. As this warp doesn't involve any of those cases, nothing happens here. Now, this is when the game actually finds where to send Link next. 3 variables are at play here: the next entrance index, the scene setup index, and the current entrance index. The scene setup index is a variable used to dictate how a scene needs to be set up. Many scenes, such as towns and houses, will be different depending on Link's age and the time of day, so they have a setup for all 4 combinations of these factors. If the cutscene number is between 0 and 15, a cutscene will be playing, so the scene has to be set up differently from the first 4 setups. In that case, the scene will define more than 4 setups, and the setup of any given cutscene will always be the cutscene number plus 4. The scene setup index is a modifier that is added to the next entrance index to set the current entrance index. This means that each entrance has a group of indexes that lead to it. They all have the basic 4. If the time factors don't change anything in the scene, these 4 setups will simply be duplicates. The first entrance of the scene is the one that holds the cutscene, so that entrance has one more scene setup for every cutscene that can play in it. In this case, the cutscene number is 1, so the scene setup index is set to 5. This is then added to 238 to get a current entrance index of 243. This index is specifically reserved for the cutscene after beating the Deku Tree, so the game now knows to load Kokiri Forest set up for the post-dungeon cutscene, so it will load the scene from its memory and play the cutscene. This is what happens when the warp works as intended. Now, let's see how that sequence can be broken and why it can send Link to a completely different place. For this, we're going to look at the classic example, Ganondorf from Any%, which sends Child Link straight into Ganon's collapsing tower with a dead Ganondorf and adult Zelda. So the trick begins by leaving the boss room after killing Gohma and coming back in it. To make the wrong warp possible, Link will have to exit through the boss door, but the stone slab that shuts down at the start of the fight made it inaccessible. After Gohma is dead, if Link re-enters the room, the stone slab will be gone. The door will then be accessible from the blue warp, which is also going to be in the same place every time. There are 3 ways to do this: dying while dealing the killing blow, clipping through the stone slab during the fight and using the door to leave and re-enter, or save and quit. The current fastest route is to leave the Deku Tree after killing Gohma to come back later for the wrong warp, so dying is preferred. For this demonstration, we're gonna kill Gohma, save and quit, and re-enter our file. Next, Link drops bugs and catches them again. This is so that he has a full bottle in his hand, which sets up the next part. When Link presses the C button to use a bottle that has bugs, a fish, or a fairy in it, this animation will play. If Link is in midair while the button is pressed, the game will wait for Link to land and then trigger the animation. However, for this to work, the bottle needs to already be in Link's hand. Now, if the game is waiting for Link to land and a new item is used, something interesting will happen. The game is still trying to play the animation associated with the item Link wants to use, but that item is no longer a bottle. By pressing B, Link is trying to use his sword, but unlike the bottle, the sword has no animation associated with it. If the game tries to play the animation of an item that doesn't have one, it will revert to the default animation, which happens to be playing the ocarina. So Link will play his sword like an ocarina. But playing the ocarina isn't the goal here. The goal is to interrupt the sequence where Link enters the blue warp and is teleported out of the dungeon. If Link starts playing the ocarina on the same frame as he enters the blue warp, the sequence will look like it's starting, but Link will not enter the warp. At this point, the ocarina can be cancelled to regain control of Link, which lets him move around while the game is trying to teleport him away from the dungeon. So at this point, everything that normally goes on during a regular warp is still happening. When the blue warp timer hits 101, the screen will fade out and the scene transition will happen. However, that timer is tied to the blue warp, so if the camera is far enough and looking away from it, the timer will stop updating, giving Link as much time as he wants to move around. The next part is to exit the boss room through the door so that the scene transition happens right as the blue warp timer hits 101 using careful movement and camera manipulation. If done correctly, here's how the scene transition goes. This all happens during the last frame where the boss room is loaded, but the game processes it in this order. A few frames prior, as Link went through the door, the next entrance index was set to 594, which corresponds to the Deku Tree basement. First, it is copied over to the current entrance index. All objects in the room are then updated one final time before being deloaded. During that object update, the blue warp sets the next entrance index to 238, which is Kokiri Forest, and the next cutscene number to 1 so it can play this cutscene. However, the next entrance index has already been copied over to the current entrance index, so it's too late now. The blue warp is telling Link to go to Kokiri Forest, but he's already set to go to the Deku Tree basement. Then the next cutscene number is copied over to the current cutscene number, then reset back to -1. The time update doesn't need to be changed, so that step is skipped. Also, none of the 5 special cutscenes apply, so the check for them returns nothing. Next, the game figures out where to send Link. Because Link entered the door to the Deku Tree basement, the current entrance index is 594. But at the same time, since the blue warp was sending Link to a cutscene, it set the cutscene number to 1. So the scene setup index is set to 5, then it's added to the entrance index to get a final entrance index of 599. Remember that each entrance has 4 indexes plus 1 per cutscene. Well, Kokiri Forest has 10 different cutscenes that can play in it, so it has 14 indexes in total. A scene setup index of 5 is not a problem here. In fact, it can be anything from 0 all the way up to 13. The Deku Tree basement entrance, however, has no cutscene related to it, so it only has 4 indexes. It takes up entries 594 through 597, but not 599, so 599 points to another entrance entirely. Which one though? Assuming maps are ordered somewhat logically in the game's memory, you would expect it to be a related entrance like the boss room or the main Deku Tree entrance, or maybe the next dungeon to Dongo's Cavern. But that's not the case. It turns out the entrance list has almost no logical order. Different entrances in the same scene are all over the place, and completely unrelated scenes are next to each other. It just so happens that the next set of entrance indexes, from 598 to 601, is one of the rooms in the interior of the tower collapse sequence at the end of the game. So at index 599, the game is sending Link to the tower collapse interior. And the game crashes. But why? First, this is not a game crash. It's actually a soft lock. The game itself is running, but it's locked in this state. It's soft locked because since the cutscene index is at 1, the game played a cutscene in the tower collapse interior. So which cutscene did it play? You would think it might be the end of Deku Tree cutscene, but that wouldn't be correct. In fact, it played the title screen cutscene. Since Link's coordinates in the title screen cutscene are way out of bounds in the tower collapse interior scene, the game soft locks. But why did it play the title screen? Well, because in this example, we used a save and quit to go back to Goma's room, so the title screen is the last cutscene that played. This means that the cutscene pointer is still pointing to the title screen. When a cutscene needs to be played, the cutscene pointer is a variable that points to a location in the memory where the data for the cutscene was loaded. Normally, the cutscene pointer is updated by the header of the scene where the cutscene is about to play, but the Tower Collapse Interior's header doesn't have a cutscene command, so it didn't change the cutscene pointer. So what's the scene header? To keep it simple, it's a list of commands that initialize a new scene during a transition. It sets values for a lot of different things, like link spawns, collision, and default background music. There's also a command in this list called the alternate header command, which allows a scene to have multiple scene headers and therefore multiple ways to be initialized. This is required for a scene to be able to have cutscene set up so that it can be initialized differently when a cutscene plays. Ganon's Tower Collapse Interior doesn't have any alternate headers or cutscene commands, so when wrong warping to it, the game will attempt to play the last cutscene watched. So let's go back and redo the trick, but using the former any % route. Here, Link is at low health while fighting Goma and jump slashes into her to deal the final blow, killing himself in the process. This lets him warp back to the entrance of the dungeon. This means that when Link comes back in the boss room, the last cutscene was the one that plays when entering the Deku Tree for the first time. When this cutscene tries to play in the Tower Collapse Interior, a problem occurs. Because the Inside the Deku Tree first time cutscene was loaded a while ago, its data isn't useful anymore and is prone to be overwritten by other things being loaded into the memory. As the Tower Collapse Interior is loaded, its scene data overwrites the Deku Tree first time cutscene data. When initializing a cutscene, the game looks at the cutscene data to see how many frames it has and how many commands it needs to execute. Because the cutscene data was overwritten by new unrelated data, the game reads garbage values. When a cutscene has a negative number of frames or a negative number of commands, the game has a failsafe where it simply skips trying to play the cutscene altogether. And this is how you can avoid soft locking the game during the wrong warp. If you're practicing the trick, you can also avoid a soft lock by pausing in Link's house after viewing the title screen cutscene. Doing that will replace the values that the game reads as cutscene data with text from the pause menu, which if done in Link's house happens to be the right values to trigger the failsafe and skip the cutscene. So that was the well-known Ganondorf wrong warp, but there are many other possibilities. Each dungeon blue warp has up to 7 different possible outcomes. We're gonna look at all of these in part 2 of this video, which you can click on right now. Thanks for watching.